Road Rage is an open-world driving middle-budget game, and it hits all the marks I expect from its genre, but in a very shallow way. What sets driving games apart from other games is the level of variety and fidelity of game mechanics tailored to a compelling story. That's what makes them memorable and unique. And unfortunately, unlike most driving games which have unique objectives tailored specifically to events unfolding in the game world, Road Rage is basically just a collection of increasingly difficult driving minigames. To bring up one example, in the Driver series, when you're tasked with transporting bombs, you are literally given bombs to transport, which have their own unique mechanics and challenges. In Road Rage, if you're tasked with transporting bombs, you are given a series of checkpoints to race through in a set period of time. No bombs in sight, no animation of your character using the bombs, no special mechanics involved, it's just an ordinary checkpoint race. Road Rage does still technically have more variety than your average racing game because it has a variety of mission types, but most of the missions of the same type feel interchangeable, and this is a terrible thing to say about a driving game. Driving games usually thrive on variety. But we've only been talking about how Road Rage fits into the genre so far. As for the mission types themselves and general gameplay, well, they fare pretty much the same. Let's start with the game's main selling point and the very reason for its title, the vehicular combat, the Road Rage. You're capable of riding up alongside other cyclists and smashing them with whatever weapon you currently have equipped. And this isn't a bad idea, but there's a reason that this is either usually a secondary mechanic or a mechanic that only appears in older games where it's much easier to pull off. But in a fully 3D, completely realized city like this, it's very difficult to make a melee combat on motorcycles relevant to the game design. However, in their determination to include combat as a core mechanic, they came up with what I assume they thought was a good solution. In order to attack an enemy biker, you have to press square to enter combat mode when you see the square button prompt above their head. When you press the square button, your biker accelerates unreasonably fast to catch up to the opponent biker, and then you can start wailing at them using the circle button to attack right or the square button to attack left. While you're engaging in combat with an opponent biker, you're soft locked onto them, and it's difficult to escape from their grasp until one of you is taken down. In theory, this presents some interesting challenges during races, because not only do you have to pay attention to your fellow biker in taking them out, but you also have to pay attention to the general direction you're moving, and not lose track and run off the course and kill yourself. Unfortunately, there's very little incentive for the player to use combat during races. It's often much easier just to boost around your opponents, and is often far more productive. Your opponents respawn immediately after you destroy them, so it's hard to see the purpose in destroying them to begin with. Especially since you have to make yourself vulnerable to destroy them in the first place. Again, time that could be better spent boosting past them instead. This means that combat is often relegated exclusively to combat-focused mission types, assassination, and knockout, where you have to destroy a certain number of bikers in a certain amount of time. And these are incredibly trivial. You basically just mash on the square and circle button until everything in front of you goes down. Because in both of these mission types, the racers move hilariously slower than you do. So the game's main selling point, the melee combat, is not only incredibly shallow, but not even useful for most of the game modes, and when it is useful for the game modes where it's intended to be used the most, it's so trivial as to be absolute button mashing. There are, of course, other game mechanics at play besides the melee combat, but it really just feels like a half-baked list of things you have to include to legally call yourself a driving game. The biggest offender is that there are at least 3 different types of checkpoint races, and they are checkpoint races with big glowing checkpoints. It's not that checkpoint races are inherently bad, but in a driving game that was supposed to be focused on vehicular melee combat, relying mostly on checkpoint races for the meat of your gameplay when several other games had done it better 17 years earlier isn't a great game plan. It's not that there's anything inherently flawed about the checkpoint races, they work perfectly fine, it's just that it's an incredibly simple mechanic to fall back on, and there are several games that have done it much better. Aside from poorly implemented melee combat and rather generic checkpoint races and lap-based checkpoint races, there is one other mission type left to be discovered. Finally, we've arrived at the Stunt mission type, which perhaps feels more out of place than anything else in the game. It feels like it was included simply so the developers could claim they had stunt-based missions in their game, but all of the stunt missions play out the same way. You need to perform a wheelie for a certain amount of time, get a certain amount of airtime, and perform a certain amount of near misses on pedestrian vehicles. The airtime and wheelie are easy enough, especially if you utilize the bounce physics to their maximum, but the required amount of near misses is genuinely unreasonably high, and unless you cheese the game out the way I did, I can't see too many people completing these missions. So not only does it feel completely out of place with all the other mission types, but it's the place where people are most likely to give up and stop playing, which is kind of unforgivable. These stunt missions really shouldn't have been here. The game tries to add a few nuances in the customization department, but those aren't even worth talking about. You can upgrade your motorcycles, but I couldn't notice a difference after I upgraded them, which makes me question whether the upgrades actually do anything, or whether they just pretend to have upgrades. The weapon types are different, but you generally just want to go with the fastest weapon possible. There are some things that I think are genuinely good about the game. The handling on all the motorbikes is great. There's no rubber band AI, thankfully. That would be awful. And that's about it, really. The game seems to be entirely lacking any sense of cohesion or purpose. I know what it was trying to be, but what it was trying to be is not present here in the game itself, which is rather depressing.